The Galactic Cooperative had a rather extensive list of things that could kill you. This list had been compiled over 3,000 standard cycles, encompassing the collective wisdom of 47 spacefaring civilizations, and it was widely regarded as the most comprehensive death catalogue in known space. Somewhere around entry number 4721, between crystalline spore clouds and gravity-inverted waterfalls, sat Verdaxis 9, a planet so thoroughly hostile to life that the very act of naming it had killed 2 xenolinguists who contracted a blood parasite from the atmospheric samples. The planet's designation as a Class-XII Quarantine World meant that only military observation posts were permitted, and even those were constructed in orbit because, well, touching the surface seemed like the kind of decision that ended with your next of kin receiving a very apologetic letter and a small box of ashes. If they could recover the ashes, which they usually couldn't. Commander Zelvik of the Thracian Defense Corps stood in the observation deck of Station Watchful Eye, staring down at the green and blue nightmare rotating below. He had served here for 6 cycles, which was 5 cycles longer than most officers, before they requested immediate transfer to literally anywhere else. Black hole research stations, asteroid mining colonies, diplomatic posts on planets where the atmosphere was composed entirely of sulfuric acid. Anywhere but here. It's beautiful from up here, his second officer, Lieutenant Crace, observed, her scales reflecting the pale light from the planet below. So is a carnivorous bloom flower before it dissolves your internal organs, Zelvik replied without taking his eyes off the planet. Beauty and death are not mutually exclusive concepts. Verdaxis 9 was beautiful, in the way that a perfectly designed weapon might be considered elegant. Its jungles covered 87% of the landmass, dense canopies so thick that orbital scans could barely penetrate to the forest floor. The remaining 13% consisted of mountains that exhaled toxic gases, swamps that could liquefy bone, and beaches where the sand was actually colonies of microscopic predators waiting for something stupid enough to walk barefoot. The jungle itself was a masterwork of evolutionary hostility. Every tree secreted compounds that would cause paralysis in most carbon-based life forms. The flowers released spores that hijacked neural systems. The fruits were delicious right up until they liquefied your digestive tract. Even the water had things living in it that considered internal organs to be prime real estate. Zelvik had compiled extensive documentation on exactly why Verdaxis 9 remained uninhabited and uninhabitable. His reports were considered required reading at the Galactic Military Academy under the section titled Why Some Planets Should Stay Empty. He took a certain pride in this, which made the message currently displayed on his command console particularly baffling. "They're sending someone down there," Crace said, reading over his shoulder. "I can see that, Lieutenant." "A human." "Yes, thank you for that observation as well." Humans were the new species on the galactic block, having achieved faster-than-light travel only 40 cycles ago. They came from a planet called Earth, which itself was classified as a Class X death world, though that designation was currently under review because humans kept insisting their planet was quite nice actually, and not that dangerous if you're careful. This was said by a species that had evolved alongside creatures that could kill them in dozens of creative ways and considered it normal. The Cooperative had cautiously integrated humanity, giving them the jobs nobody else wanted. Toxic waste management, extreme environment research, pest control on ships, because apparently humans thought space vermin were kind of cute and had no qualms about grabbing them bare-handed. And now apparently jungle surveying on a Class-XII Quarantine World. The request comes from the Terraforming Assessment Division, Crace continued. They want to evaluate the planet for potential resource extraction, the planet that has killed every probe we've sent down, the same one. The planet where we lost an entire research team because they opened a sealed sample container and something inside turned their ship's atmosphere into acid. That would be the one, yes. Zelvik's mandibles clicked in frustration. And they're sending one human. According to the file, his name is Marcus Chen, specialty in extreme environment adaptation and sustainable settlement construction. Crace paused. It also notes he has experience with challenging ecosystems and comes highly recommended. Challenging ecosystems, Zelvik repeated flatly. Lieutenant, this planet doesn't have ecosystems. It has organized murder systems with extra steps. Nevertheless, 3 planetary rotations later, Marcus Chen arrived via shuttle, carrying 2 duffel bags and wearing what appeared to be standard-issue human clothing, sturdy pants, a shirt with pockets, and boots that had seen considerable use. He was unremarkable by human standards, average height, dark hair pulled back in a practical style, and an expression that suggested he found the whole universe mildly amusing. Commander Zelvik. The human extended his hand in that peculiar greeting gesture his species favored. Zelvik grasped it briefly, still uncomfortable with the direct physical contact humans seemed to enjoy. Mr. Chen, I trust you understand the dangers of the assignment you've accepted. I read the briefing, Marcus said, slinging one bag over his shoulder. Sounds like a standard Class-XII environment. Honestly reminds me of this place in Brazil where I worked before. Well, minus the part where the trees have neurotoxins. Those are new. The trees are the least dangerous element. The briefing mentioned carnivorous vines, atmospheric spores, predatory mammals in the megafauna category, and water that's basically a bacterial warfare agent. Marcus grinned. So pretty standard for a Death World survey. Zelvik's translator must have malfunctioned because it sounded like the human had just described a nightmare scenario as pretty standard. You understand that we cannot guarantee extraction if you encounter difficulties, Zelvik pressed. The atmospheric interference makes transport unreliable. If you activate your emergency beacon, it may take hours to reach you. Hours during which lots of things might try to eat me, dissolve me, or poison me, Marcus finished. Got it. Don't worry, Commander. I've done this before. Not on Verdaxis 9 you haven't. Nothing has survived on Verdaxis 9. Then I guess I'll be the first. The human smiled in that disconcerting way his species did, showing teeth. Among most civilized species this was a threat display. Humans did it when they were happy, or amused, or sometimes right before doing something monumentally stupid. Zelvik suspected this fell into the latter category. The drop pod launched at dawn station time. Zelvik watched from the observation deck as the small craft descended through the atmosphere, expecting at any moment for it to veer off course, explode, or simply vanish like the others. Instead, it landed smoothly in a clearing near the southern jungle expanse, right where Marcus had requested. Telemetry is stable, Crace reported. He's exiting the pod now. The sensor feed was grainy, filtered through layers of atmospheric interference, but Zelvik could make out the human figure stepping onto Verdaxis 9's surface. Marcus stood there for a moment, looking around, then raised his wrist communicator. Commander, can you hear me? Affirmative, Mr. Chen. Status? Oh, it's gorgeous down here. Temperatures about 32 Celsius. Humidity is high but manageable. The air has that fresh jungle smell. You know, like petrichor mixed with vegetation. That fresh smell is likely spore discharge from the surrounding flora. Probably. I'll set up the filtration mask in a bit. First, I want to walk the perimeter. Get a sense of the space. I strongly advise against, Zelvik began, but Marcus had already started walking toward the tree line. What followed over the next hour was a masterclass in why protocols existed. Marcus approached the jungle edge, where vines hung like waiting serpents, and simply pushed through them. When one vine wrapped around his arm, an automatic response that had killed 3 xenobotanists during remote observations, Marcus calmly unwound it, examined the suction cup-like structures along its length, and tied it back onto itself. "Interesting defense mechanism," he commented. "If I avoid the underside, they're harmless." "The underside contains paralytic compounds," Zelvik said through the communicator, his voice strained. "Yeah, I figured. That's why I'm not touching it." The human logic was so simple, it almost hurt. Don't touch the dangerous part. Why had that never occurred to anyone else? Because everyone else died before they could learn which part was dangerous. Zelvik's mind supplied helpfully. Marcus spent the rest of the day doing what he called surveying, which apparently meant walking around, touching things that shouldn't be touched, and making notes on a handheld device. He identified 3 different types of predatory plants, categorized their trigger mechanisms, and figured out safe paths through areas that sensor scans had marked as completely impassable. When a creature that resembled a cross between a lizard and a bear emerged from the undergrowth, Zelvik nearly activated the emergency extraction protocol. The creature was a Verdaxis apex predator, 3 meters of scaled muscle and teeth, with venom sacs visible beneath its jaw. Marcus stopped walking. The creature stopped. They regarded each other. "Hey there," Marcus said softly. "You're a big one, aren't you?" The creature sniffed the air, circling slightly. Marcus remained still, hands visible, making no sudden movements. After what felt like an eternity, the creature huffed, apparently deciding the human wasn't worth the effort, and lumbered back into the jungle. "Well, that's good to know," Marcus said. "They're ambush predators, but not aggressive if you don't surprise them." Zelvik's secondary hearts were pounding. You just stood there. Running triggers chase instinct in most predators. Standing still and appearing non-threatening usually works better. Marcus continued walking, as if he hadn't just had a close encounter with death. "Besides, I wasn't in its territory. It was just curious." On the second day, Marcus began construction. "What are you doing?" Zelvik demanded as sensor feeds showed the human clearing vegetation with what appeared to be a simple machete. "Building a shelter. The drop pod is fine for equipment storage, but I'll need something more permanent if I'm going to be here for a month." "You intend to stay a month?" The survey was estimated at 3 days maximum. 3 days isn't enough to understand an ecosystem. I need to see weather patterns, animal behavior cycles, plant growth rates. Plus, Marcus grunted as he cut through a particularly thick vine, if this place has potential for resource extraction, someone needs to figure out how humans can actually work here safely. Over the following days, Zelvik watched in growing disbelief as Marcus Chen did the impossible. The human constructed a shelter using local materials, carefully selecting trees that didn't secrete toxins and binding them with vines he'd identified as non-carnivorous. He created a water filtration system using sand, charcoal and fabric from his kit, turning the bacterial nightmare water into something drinkable. The microorganisms die at sustained temperatures above 70 Celsius. Marcus explained during one of his daily reports. "Boiling and filtering handles most of it. The rest I'm treating with iodine tablets." "You're drinking the water?" Zelvik couldn't keep the horror from his voice. "Well, yeah. Can't exactly have it shipped down every day. Don't worry, I tested it extensively before consumption. Only mild gastrointestinal distress for the first 2 days." Mild, Mr. Chen. Those organisms are classified as lethal. To most species, sure. Human digestive systems are pretty robust. We evolved eating carrion and raw meat. This is actually less dangerous than some of the street food I've had in Bangkok. By day 7, Marcus had expanded his shelter into something resembling a small hut, complete with a raised sleeping platform to avoid ground-dwelling predators, a covered area for equipment, and what he called a porch, where he could sit and observe the jungle. He'd also begun planting a garden. "Those are seeds from Earth," Marcus explained when Zelvik inquired about the small plot of tilled soil. "Tomatoes, beans and some herbs. I want to see how they adapt to local conditions. If Earth plants can grow here, it opens up agricultural possibilities. You're gardening on a Class-XII Quarantine World. The soil's actually pretty rich once you get past the top layer. High nitrogen content, good drainage. It's not that different from tropical regions back home. Except those tropical regions don't actively try to kill you," Zelvik thought, but didn't say. By day 12, other station personnel were gathering in the observation deck during their off hours to watch the humans' progress. It had become better entertainment than the holodramas from Centauri Prime. "Is he making furniture?" Crace asked, pointing at the sensor feed. Indeed, Marcus had constructed a table and chairs, sanding them smooth with rocks and treating the wood with some compound he'd synthesized from plant resins. He sat there now, eating a meal he'd prepared from a combination of his rations and something he'd caught in a trap. "What is he eating?" someone whispered. "Looks like one of the tree-dwelling omnivores," another officer replied. "The ones with the parasite clusters in their nerve tissue. He knows about the parasites, right?" As if hearing them, Marcus's voice crackled over the open channel. "Commander, you'll want to note in the official record that the tree-dwelling hexapods are safe for human consumption if you cook them thoroughly. The parasites are heat-sensitive. Tastes kind of like chicken, actually. Well, if chicken had 6 legs and could climb trees." Zelvik added another entry to his incident report, which was starting to read less like a scientific document and more like a fever dream. The true turning point came on day 15. Marcus had been exploring deeper into the jungle, mapping safe routes and cataloging species. The video feed showed him moving through the undergrowth with confidence now, stepping over trigger roots of snapjaw plants and ducking beneath spore clouds with practiced ease. He'd learned the jungle's language, its rhythms and dangers, in a way that should have taken years if it was possible at all. Then he encountered the indigenous population. They weren't supposed to exist. Every scan of Verdaxis 9 had indicated no sentient life, no tool-using species, no civilization. But scans couldn't penetrate the deep canopy, and apparently no one had thought to check thoroughly because there they were, bipedal, covered in mottled green skin that blended with the foliage, standing roughly 1.5 meters tall, watching Marcus from the trees. Zelvik's translator went into overdrive as the creatures made clicking, whistling sounds. Marcus raised his hands slowly, palms out, in what was apparently a universal gesture of peace, because the creatures didn't immediately attack. "Commander," Marcus said quietly, "I'm making first contact with what appears to be a pre-industrial indigenous species, requesting guidance." First contact protocols were complex, requiring diplomatic teams, cultural specialists, and approximately 6 months of observation before direct interaction. Zelvik opened his mouth to say exactly that. One of the creatures dropped from the trees, landing in front of Marcus with a spear made of sharpened bone. It was clearly a threat display, a territorial challenge. Marcus slowly crouched down, making himself smaller, and placed his machete on the ground between them. Then he pushed it toward the creature and sat back, hands visible. The creature approached cautiously, examined the machete, and picked it up. It tested the edge against a nearby vine, watching as the blade cut through effortlessly where its bone spear would have struggled. The creature's large eyes widened. It looked at Marcus. Marcus looked back. Then the creature made a series of gestures, pointing at the machete, then at Marcus, then deeper into the jungle. The message was clear: "Come with me. Commander, I'm going to follow them. This could be important. Mr. Chen, you cannot." But Marcus was already walking, following the creature into territory that no outsider had ever mapped, carrying only his wits and apparently an inexhaustible supply of foolish courage. The indigenous settlement was remarkable. Built in and around the massive trees, the structures used the jungle rather than fighting it. Vines were trained to grow as bridges. Dangerous plants were cultivated as defensive barriers. The people who Marcus started calling the Verdaxians in his reports had lived here for generations, adapting and surviving in ways the Galactic Cooperative had deemed impossible. Over the following days, Marcus integrated himself into their community with an ease that defied explanation. He learned their language, a combination of clicks, whistles, and hand gestures. He taught them about his tools, sharing knowledge of metallurgy by showing them how to work the small forge he'd built for equipment repairs. They taught him about the jungle, pointing out food sources and medicinal plants that weren't in any database. The settlement grew, not just the Verdaxian village, but Marcus's own outpost. What had started as a simple shelter was now a complex of structures. A main dwelling with proper walls and a watertight roof. A storage building for equipment and supplies. A workshop where he constructed tools and repairs. A communal area where he met with Verdaxian visitors, trading earth goods for local knowledge. He'd cleared paths through the jungle, marking safe routes with carved symbols that even the Verdaxians had adopted. He'd built bridges over toxic streams using local wood that resisted the corrosive properties of the water. He'd created a sustainable system for waste management that actually enriched the soil instead of poisoning it. It's all about working with the environment instead of against it. Marcus explained during one of his weekly comprehensive reports. The Verdaxians figured that out generations ago. We can learn from them. By day 28, station personnel were taking shifts in the observation deck just to watch. The human settlement had become a hub of activity. Verdaxians visited regularly, bringing gifts and receiving tools or knowledge in return. Marcus had established what amounted to a trading post, a neutral ground where he could study the indigenous culture while providing them with technologies that improved their lives without disrupting their society. He'd also finished mapping a quarter of the southern jungle, identifying resources, cataloging species, and creating detailed guides for safe navigation. His reports were comprehensive, practical, and would revolutionize how the Cooperative approached hostile environments. On day 30, a Cooperative inspection ship arrived. High Counselor Thrace herself came, a distinction usually reserved for first contact situations or major diplomatic incidents. She was of Verdaxis, tall and imposing, with crystalline features that refracted light in unsettling ways. She materialized in Station Watchful Eye's command center with an entourage of scientists and military advisors. "Commander Zelvik," she began without preamble, "your reports have been difficult to believe." "Yes, High Counselor. I've had difficulty believing them myself, and I watched it all happen. This human, Marcus Chen, has successfully established a settlement on a Class-XII Quarantine World. Not just a settlement, High Counselor. a thriving outpost with indigenous cooperation, sustainable systems, and comprehensive environmental documentation. And he did this alone? Yes, High Counselor. Thrace's crystalline features shifted in what might have been skepticism. I will need to see this for myself. The inspection team descended in a proper diplomatic shuttle with environmental suits, armed escorts, and enough medical equipment to establish a field hospital. They landed in the clearing where Marcus's drop pod still sat, now covered in flowering vines that the human had trained to grow as camouflage. Marcus met them wearing his standard work clothes, dusty and stained but functional, looking completely at ease in an environment that had required the inspection team to arrive in sealed suits. High Counselor, he greeted with a slight bow. Welcome to Verdaxis 9, Mr. Chen. Thrace's voice through her suit speaker was distorted but clear. You appear to be unprotected. The environmental hazards are manageable once you understand them, Marcus replied. I can provide a full briefing, but honestly, the best way to understand is to see. I've prepared a tour of the settlement and arranged a meeting with the Verdaxian elders, if you're interested. Over the next 6 hours, Marcus walked the inspection team through his settlement. He showed them the filtration systems, the safe paths, the defensive arrangements that protected against predators. He introduced them to Verdaxian families who had helped him understand the jungle. He demonstrated how local plants could be processed for medicine, how the toxic water could be purified, how even the most dangerous creatures could be avoided or deterred with simple precautions. The scientists took samples. The military advisors examined his defenses. The cultural specialists interviewed the Verdaxians through Marcus's translation. And through it all, High Counselor Thrace remained silent, watching. Finally, standing in the center of what Marcus had designated as the village square, a cleared area where both humans and Verdaxians could gather safely, Thrace spoke. You've built a community here. Yes, High Counselor. On a planet we classified as uninhabitable. Technically, it was classified as uninhabitable for most cooperative species based on atmospheric composition, biological hazards, and hostile megafauna, Marcus corrected gently. But humans come from a similar environment. Earth has all of those things. We just adapted to them over millions of years of evolution. And you believe other species could survive here, with proper training and equipment? Yes, but more importantly, the Verdaxians are already here. They're sentient, they have culture and technology, and they've been surviving on this planet for longer than we've been watching it. They should be recognized as the primary inhabitants, and any cooperative presence should be in cooperation with them, not instead of them. Thrace turned, her crystalline form catching the filtered sunlight that made it through the canopy. You understand this changes everything. The classification of this world, our approach to hostile environments, our understanding of habitability thresholds. I understand it means we should probably stop assuming planets are uninhabitable just because they're dangerous, Marcus said. Danger and impossibility aren't the same thing. The report filed by High Counselor Thrace triggered a cascade of reevaluations across the Galactic Cooperative. Verdaxis 9 was reclassified as Class-XIII, with a note that it was habitable for species with sufficient adaptation capabilities. More importantly, the Verdaxians were recognized as sentient inhabitants with full rights to their world, and Marcus Chen was appointed as the official liaison while they decided if they wanted to join the cooperative. 215 other planets were flagged for reassessment, their uninhabitable status now questionable. The Terraforming Assessment Division requested Marcus's methodologies for sustainable settlement construction. The Xenobiology Corps wanted his cataloging techniques. The First Contact Office wanted to know how he'd established peaceful relations with a previously unknown species in less than a standard month. Marcus's response to all these requests was characteristically simple. I just paid attention and didn't assume I knew better than the environment. 6 months after the inspection, Commander Zelvik stood in the observation deck of Station Watchful Eye, which was now Station Verdaxis Prime, watching the planet below. The green and blue nightmare that had defined his career for so long looked different now. He could see the cleared areas where new settlements were being established, cooperation between cooperative species and Verdaxians creating something unprecedented. 3 human families had arrived last week, requesting settlement permits. A Thracian agricultural team was studying the local flora with Verdaxian guides. There was even discussion of establishing a proper spaceport, though Marcus had insisted it be placed where it wouldn't disrupt the jungle ecosystem. Commander, Crace approached, her scales displaying the blue pattern of contentment, the latest report from the surface. The settlement now has 47 permanent residents, 17 different species represented. Trade with the Verdaxians is flourishing, and Marcus Chen has submitted a request for construction materials. He wants to build a school. A school, Zelvik repeated. Of course the human wanted to build a school. He says if people are going to keep arriving, they need to learn how to survive here properly. He's proposing a training center for hostile environment adaptation, taught by both humans and Verdaxians. Zelvik's mandibles clicked in what might have been amusement. Approve the request. And add a note to his file, exceptional performance in the face of impossible circumstances. Already done, Commander. Though I changed impossible to unprecedented, since it clearly wasn't impossible. Down on the planet's surface, in a village that shouldn't exist on a world that shouldn't support life, Marcus Chen sat on his handmade porch, drinking filtered water that could have killed him 6 months ago, watching the sunset paint the jungle canopy in shades of orange and gold. A young Verdaxian child sat beside him, learning to carve wood with a knife Marcus had made, chattering away in the clicking language that now felt as natural as his native tongue. The jungle around them hummed with life, dangerous and beautiful, and utterly indifferent to galactic classifications. It had always been here, waiting. It just needed someone stubborn enough to learn its language. Somewhere in the Cooperative archives, the official death catalogue was being updated. Entry 4721, Verdaxis 9, was being reclassified. The new entry read, Hostile Environment, Class Fate 8, Habitable with proper adaptation, Indigenous sentient population present, Extreme caution advised, Human survival rate, surprisingly high. The universe, it seemed, had a sense of humor after all. And humanity, as usual, was completely oblivious to the joke they'd just played on everyone else's assumptions about what was possible. The officer had claimed the jungle was death. The human had built paths, huts, and a village of life, and somehow, impossibly, stupidly, wonderfully, that made all the difference.